morning, everyone. I hate to break up all this really great conversation, but the show must go on. How are you today? You look really good. So this is an exciting day, day 2 of the summit. My name is Betty Callinger. I'm a senior project director at AAAS in ISEED, and of course you've heard what that acronym stands for, but I'll tell you again. It stands for Inclusive STEM Ecosystems for Diversity and Equity. I'm also a member of the Noyce team that has organized the summits for the last 15 years. And it's been a great pleasure. And I can say that I was at the 2009 summit, and then of course have been at the summit after that. Is there anyone in the audience who was at the 2009? Stand up. This is history. I saw some hands wave. Ann Cavallo? Yeah, yay. The Noyce team is very pleased to open today's program with a presentation by Dr. Okhee Lee. She will make a presentation, and she will also facilitate a panel discussion that we call Voices from the Field. The panelists are Noyce alumni who are out in the field. They're teaching science and math in high-need schools. These teachers were nominated for the panel by their Noyce PIs. So think into the future. For the 2024 summit, we will ask for nominations several months before the event. So I encourage the PIs and the co-PIs in the audience to think about nominating students from your program who are now teaching or about to step into the classroom. We'll send an announcement, so be ready. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lee. She's a professor in the Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development at New York University. Okhee is committed, shout out for New York. Okhee is committed to advancing research, policy, and practice that promotes STEM and language for all students, particularly multilingual learners. Okhee was a member of the Next Generation Science Standards writing team, and she served as leader for the NGSS Diversity and Equity team. Her work involves integrating science, language, and computational thinking with a focus on multilingual learners. Her latest work addresses justice-centered STEM education by integrating multiple STEM subjects, including data science and computer science, to address pressing societal challenges using the case of the COVID-19 pandemic. Okhee is also a good friend of my organization, AAAS. She currently serves as the chair of the steering group for AAAS Section Q, which is centered on education. So let's now welcome Dr. Okhee Lee.
Good morning, everybody. It is an honor to be here with you today for both personal and professional reasons. For my personal reasons, 2 of my nephews-in-law are Noyce teaching fellows from the American Museum of Natural History. Betty, you did not know that was a surprise. One of them fell in love with a fellow Noyce fellow, and they married, and they're expecting a baby. So in my family, I have 3 Noyce teaching fellows, and that means the stake is very high in my family because this session means it to them. For my professional reasons, I would like to shout out Greg, Noah, and Sam. They are my 3 family members. Thank you. For my professional reasons, I would like to share my commitment to STEM education for equity and justice for the past decade. And this is how fast the world is changing and how STEM education should be at the center of the changes of the global society. So I would like to speak about 3 topics, and that defines my life. Science and language integration with the multilingual learners, and then justice-centered STEM education, and then advocacy and activism. So the first topic of integration. Now, the science education community, we had a framework for K-12 science education, which is what counts as a contemporary science and how children learn science. And the NGSS are based on the framework document. Now, there was a lag for several years in terms of language education community, and now we have a better consensus between the science education community and language education. When the English learners in STEM subjects was published by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, and then WIDA standards in 2020, which is like a language proficiency standards where the multilingual learners came, and now research, practice, and policy are developing a consensus across STEM disciplines, STEM subjects, and English language education with a multilingual, all students, but multilingual learners. So here is the science standards. As Betty mentioned, the framework came out a decade ago, and when I was invited to be a member of the writing team, it took a second to say, absolutely, it would be my honor to serve for the education system, because that's where the action takes place. And then I was invited to be the leader of NGSS Equity and Diversity, and we called all standards and all students. And I was really honored to work with several members of the writing team who served on the diversity and equity team. So that was the science standards. Because I was a member of the NGSS writing team and the leader of the NGSS diversity and equity team, I wanted to do something about what the NGSS would look like in classroom implementation. So with the support of the National Science Foundation, always grateful for funding, at NYU, we developed NYU SAIL. It is a science and integrated language research lab, and we call it doing science, or we could say doing STEM using language. So the year-long 5th grade curriculum has 4 units, and it is a storyline of each unit. So you can see the first one is a physical science of what happens to our garbage. We make lots of garbage. The second is about why did the tiger salamander vanish or disappear? So you can see something about ecosystem and endangered species. And the third is, why does it matter if we drink bottled water or tap water? So students are getting into EPA standards of the contents of the bottled water and the tap water. And you can see the environmental theme there. And then the last one is, why do falling stars fall? And we played with the expression of a language. Now, I would like to start with the first one. What happens to our garbage? You can see I talk trash a lot, so bear with me. The phenomenon is that our school, home, and community make large amounts of garbage every day. The breakfast that you have, and all of us. So it's lots of garbage. The driving question is, what happens to our garbage? And we think of a local, which is also a universal phenomenon, as really important because everybody has experience of a garbage basura. But it is also the garbage. You can do garbage from physical science, earth science, life science. And I know 5th grade students, 2 of them said that when we have too much garbage, we may just ship them to the space. And I said, what? So that's the space systems. Not kidding, right? So here is a contemporary approaches in science instruction. You can see that in the first day of a 5th grade science instruction, students see mounds of garbage in the center of the room. All right, here we go. So the question is, what do we want to know about the garbage? Here is a phenomenon. We hope that the phenomenon is compelling. And because we cannot keep the garbage in the center of the room because it'll stink, all right, of course. So we make what we affectionately call landfill bottles. And one is an open system. The other one is a closed system. So students are doing system and system models without ever using the term system. They are looking at patterns, which is another cross-cutting concept. They are looking at the changes in the properties of a matter, which is a physical science. Now, after some time, they are going to open the closed bottle. Drum roll, please. But before they open it, they measure the weight. And, oh, the banana and orange have disappeared, and the weight should be less. Other students will say, I see drops of water, so the condensation, and there is a new substance, it should be way more. And I, as a multilingual learner, English learner, can say, nothing gets in, nothing gets out, the same weight, it's the same weight. And guess what? So it's the same weight, it's a conservation of weight, and the smell, the smell of garbage is awesome. What's that smell of garbage? And the students are learning that there are microbes that are causing the decomposition, so they are doing it. So you can see that traditionally we had standards to teach, standards to be tested. Not anymore. Students have the agency that here is a phenomenon. I wanted to figure out the phenomenon. I have a specific questions. So who is driving science instruction? Students. Here, the phenomenon, the questions, and they're using standards to explain the questions. So the agency, it flipped, right? So I felt pretty good about it. It was really an honor that our resources were translated into state resources across the science and language divisions. So it is an honor, and this is where the activism, the intellectual commitment and intellectual leadership come in. Okay. So I felt pretty good about it, in terms of science education. Now, in terms of English language proficiency standards, there was a lack of that students are making sense of phenomena. Oops, I have to use the vocabulary. I have to do the pre-teaching and front-loading. I have to use the sentence frames. That I'm trying to figure out the ideas. So before the 2020 WIDA edition, I studied writing. And it was quite a risk that I was critiquing the good work of my colleagues, but it felt right. And I hit in educational researcher, which is the AERA, the newsletter. And especially I wrote a few pieces. And after 2020 edition, we are great friends. I gave an interview last summer. I'm visiting WIDA again to develop the collaboration because of the consensus between the STEM education and language education. So what does it look like? The ESSA, the federal legislation, currently uses English learners, and it's an improvement before limited English proficiency students. Remember that? Limited, okay, English learners. WIDA uses multilingual learners. English, I speak English. It's a second language, but Korean, Chinese, German, multilingual, okay. It's an asset. WIDA also uses a multimodality. Typically, we thought of language as reading, writing, speaking, and listening. No, WIDA says it's a multimodality of gestures, computational thinking, computational models, multimodality. One other thing that is also very progressive is that 2020 edition is language for science. Why is it important? Because it used to be the language of science as a vocabulary and grammar and idea typically written in textbooks. So it's science for making sense of phenomena and language for doing science. Do you see it? Thank you for nodding. And I felt pretty good about it. All right, I caused enough trouble, good trouble, necessary trouble, according to the late Representative John Noyce. And so here is, science traditionally was that students learn the math academic content because you little people do not know, and we are the experts. Contemporary view is that students are doing science and engineering and using science to figure things out, and knowledge in use. It's the same in language. Students learned about vocabulary and grammar because Okhee from Korea, you don't know English, so you have to learn vocabulary, grammar, and I'm doing pre-loading and front-loading. No, I am doing science and I am learning language as a product. Learning as a product, not as a prerequisite or precursor. So I felt pretty good about this far. All right, I could have stopped, but then I thought that was about the time several years ago that computational thinking and modeling became very prominent. And we did not want to leave multilingual learners and other students, minoritized groups, left out of computational thinking. So we wanted to go beyond. And here is, so the lesson, the unit here is that why does it matter if I drink tap water or bottled water? And it's an engineering design, and so that those plastic pollution problems are contaminating the environment, especially ocean, and harming the ocean animals. And we were just about ready to do this unit and very excited. So one example here is the social media. People do not drink water, so we are doing social media campaign, and you can see that people are drinking water from the bottles, and they are contaminating the environment by polluting the plastic water bottles. But when people drink water from the water fountains, there is a 25% chance that they will be converting to drinking water from the fountains. So I don't drink water from bottles. That was the lesson that I learned for my activism. And we were ready to do it. It's March 2020, and you can see that now. Flatten the curve of plastic pollution, flatten the curve of plastic pollution, and that's when the Washington Post published this coronavirus spread and flattened the curve. And it happened at the same time, and it just completely killed our study on engineering design using computational thinking. So that's the reality. Why is that important? So it's March 14, and this is what I learned, I was reading, December 29, at the end of the year. It says, in the early days of the pandemic, we created a simple simulation demonstrating how social distance can help slow the spread of the virus. It was translated into 13 languages and became the most viewed story in the history of the Post. And the Post was started in something like 1867. The lesson is that by March 2020, computational simulations became the public discourse. It's not in science STEM schooling anymore. It's in the public. And a lot of people, when I ask that, oh yeah, I played it with my kids at the dinner table. I played it with my students. So that. Now, why is it also important? This is the data science that we're talking about. This is also very personal to me. So in January 2020, my family lives in Daegu, South Korea, so it's a transnational. My family members told me that the whole city of 2.5 million was quarantined because of the epidemic of something called the coronavirus. 2.5 million could not leave. And I said, how are you doing, sister, brother? Well, by March 2020, they would have called me and saying, everybody is sick in New York City. How are you doing? So it hit me, and that became my mission, the commitment to activism. So you can see, so the gym was closed, and here is, I live about 5 minutes from the Washington Square Park. Thank you. The cornflowers were beautiful. The sun lilies were beautiful. Do you see, how many people do you count in the entire park? I didn't Photoshop by taking everyone. It's real. It continued. The beautiful arch during the Christmas, completely empty. That was my life for the whole year. So, contemporary approaches, that gave me a lot of time to think about the changes happening. What Gloria Lesson Building said of 4 pandemics, and actually we had a conversation about the 4 pandemics. All right. So that gave me the chance to think about science and STEM and the role in global society. So our garbage unit started with landfill. Now, because we couldn't go to landfill, we students sorted the garbage, and they made landfill bottles. And what I realized through the process is that we sanitized the phenomenon because we did not trust the students and we couldn't bring the reality. Actually, a few months ago, there was a news article in Washington Post that says that there was a town in Alabama, I think Alabama, where landfill was right around the community, and it was burning for 2 months. So it's real, right? So the phenomenon, and here is what I consider the phenomenon and why it matters to students. So I'm creating a new research agenda by looking at the data science of, here is a Johns Hopkins University data science. And this is a transnational because I would visit Korea, and you may want to visit your own homeland or your the friends. And then that's the comparison of Canada and the US, it's our world in data. And then the CDC guideline of the proportion of disproportionately affecting the death rate and hospitalization. And then given that information, then how the students understand using the computational models of why do we do 3 feet apart, 6 feet apart, and why the essential workers could not be quarantined because they are the essential parts of the society, and why this societal challenge is disproportionately impacting minoritized groups by nature, by essential. So that gave me pause of our role. So here is what I'm thinking of, just to center the STEM education. In the past, traditionally, the scientists and teachers and experts and the authorities defined the science, and little people you do not know, and those who are interested in science will learn and become the scientists and in the science careers. At least in the NGSS and based on the framework, the contemporary thinking is that all students it's all standards, all students are making sense of phenomena and design solutions to the problems, and all students have the agency of figuring things out. All students, equity. It's opportunities and access. Thinking about all the societal challenges and thinking about the future. And that means justice for those who are disproportionately affected. And students are designing solutions, and it becomes advocacy and activism that we trust the students to move forward. Now, as I say, advocacy and activism, I'm taking that up for myself because I became 60 a few years ago, so I'm an elder with wisdom, and it is my charge to be activism. Thank you, son. I'm an elder with wisdom. So here is advocacy and activism. So I continued my fast walking, and here is, I was just mesmerized by the day in and day out of youth doing protests around Washington Square Park. It's all about data. It's galvanizing the resources. I was just so impressed. And here is March 21, 2021. Here is Asian hate crime demonstration, and that was the first time. This is really the first time that I feel it in New York City. So given that, what would be my role, which is consistent with the National Academies of Science report, a call to action for science education, and look at the agenda, action 1. It says the White House, with leadership from the Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP. So I'm picking up all the acronyms of OSTP, PCAST, and all the White House committees and the leadership should raise the profile of science. Right now, I was just very dismayed as I was following up with all the appointments of OSTP, PCAST, the Climate Change Committee, the Health Committee, and I was expecting to see one of my STEM colleagues to serve on the committee. I did not see anyone. STEM education, I did not see anyone. So this is where the activism and advocacy comes in, OSTP. So I decided to do something. I have to say personally that a proper and soft-spoken Asian American woman speaking up took some courage. So I reached out to Dr. Miguel Cardona during the confirmation process, and I offered help. I would like to help because he proposed the bilingual and bicultural as his platform during the confirmation. I reached out to the education department, actually him directly, and I got the response, and I waited until the confirmation. And here is my email exchange with the Deputy White House Liaison Office of the Secretary. So I spoke with somebody. My name is, and I'm the Deputy White House Liaison at Education Department. I received your package of one of my colleagues because I was waiting. And it turned out that they were still looking for people to fill the positions. And I said, no, I'm not leaving my job in NYU. I would like to offer. We don't have the mechanism to accept the volunteers. Oh, but at least I tried. Then I decided to do something because there was no STEM education representative at OSTP and PCAS and all that. So as being part of the council member of the AERA as a member at large, I organized an AERA session in 2022 by inviting the Dr. Alejandra Nelson, who was the deputy director of OSTP at White House, and also Sechraman Panthanation, the NSF director, by inviting them to be part of the panel discussion along with Felicia Levin, the executive director of the AERA. And here I was moderating the session with the White House and NSF. It's my activism to make the connection across agencies in leadership. So one last thing that I would like to say, that I took activism, and when I was invited to be the chair of the section Q at AAAS, I said I would be honored to do. So I am the section Q education chair, and I would like to ask you to join AAAS. Travis, am I doing okay? Join for the activism so that you can do STEM education and STEM disciplines. Like Sudit, he said, I'm not a science educator, but I would like to join STEM education. And I would like to ask you to become AERA Section Q Fellow. I would like to ask you to become the committee members of a steering group. And as I step down, if anyone comes to me to become the Section Q chair, I would be delighted to mentor you. So that's my activism. And thank you so much, and I hope that I did okay with the 25 minutes. If you have any questions about becoming the Section Q chair, you can ask the question later. I'm going to move into the best part of this conference, which is voices from the field, the panelists who represent you here. In a sense, as I speak with the panelists, I'll be speaking with my 3 family members like that. So I would like to ask the panelists to come on stage. Okay, do we look all right? We rehearse. Thank you so much for being here to share your experience, expertise, and wisdom. And after the panel discussion, we are going to open up for questions and answers. So think about your questions to the panelists. I would like to start with the first question of who you are. So your name, your Noyce project, your subject matter, where you teach, and your community.
My name is Eddie Leach, and I was a fellow in the You Teach Noyce program at UTA in Arlington. I've taught. Let's go Maths. I've taught 7th, 8th, and Algebra 1 math. And the community that I serve is Arlington, Texas, Arlington ISD, which is in between Dallas and Fort Worth.
My name is Katie Flax. I graduated from Fort Hays State University in Hays, Kansas, where I was a part of the Noyce program there. Hays, if you think about like Wild West, like Dodge City, Hays, we're way out west. We're not quite as wild as they used to be, but we are definitely rural out there. At Fort Hays, I achieved a degree in secondary education and biology. I am certified to teach biology and chemistry, mathematics, and ESOL. The first district that I taught mostly sciences, biologies, physical sciences, A&P, And then last year, I took a job at the district that I actually lived in, teaching 6 through 12 math. Okay, so the district that I live in, I think if you would drive from one person's house, the farthest away on one side to the farthest away on the other side, it would be about 60 miles. So it is a district that encompasses about 5 towns, and K-12, we have less than 150 students. So you know going in that you are going to teach all different preps all day long, but you get to know your students really well. So it's a great place to be.
Okay, my name is Rafael Villa. My Noyce project, Boston University. I was a Noyce scholar there. Got my MAT in mathematics education. I teach at Chelsea, Massachusetts, which is just a little bit outside of Boston. It's a predominantly Hispanic community with a big immigration population, with mostly students and families from Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, other Central American countries, some from Colombia. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Emily Youssef, and I am coming from the Noyce Project at the University of Virginia, where I studied my undergrad and then my master's in teaching. And I teach still in that area in Charlottesville, Virginia, where I was at Journey Middle School for a couple years, and now I'm at the high school at Albemarle High School.
Hi, I'm Jai Manny. I am a Noyce Fellow at the American Museum of Natural History. I teach high school, 9 through 12, science. So currently I teach botany and astronomy and aquatics. And my school, Urban Academy High School, it's a transfer school. So in New York City, there's a lot of schools, so students get to pick what schools they want to attend. But my school, because it's a transfer school, I tend to have a majority of the schools are juniors that have attended many of them 2 high schools previously. And then there are a few that this would be their 3rd or 4th high school that they've attended. And so, yeah. That's me.
Good morning and Xin Chao. I am David Dye. I teach in Southern Alabama in Mobile County. And I was a Noyce scholar and current Master Teacher Fellow at the University of Alabama. The school community that I teach at is a magnet school, and so we pull students from all over the district. We have 91 schools in the district that serves over 55,000 students on the indigenous lands of the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Porch Creek Indians. And so I'm fortunate to have a diverse group of students year in and year out. And it's an honor to be a part of this panel with such diverse speakers.
So you can see we have a diversity of panelists from anywhere from Rafael, the finishing 1st year, to Jai, 3 years, Emily, 4 years, and Katie and Eddie, 6 years, and you're 7th year. And so he from 1st year to Master Teaching Fellow, the diversity, that's one. We also, Petty and AAAS staff, you have done very well. Across the STEM disciplines, across the geographic locations, anywhere from me, New York City to 250 students in the district. We even are very color coordinated. There was no instruction about the color code. We just managed to do so. We're very, okay. What was the most important lesson that you learned from your Noyce program?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with that answer, and I'm going to provide a little bit of context before I get to the answer. So my parents are both immigrants from Vietnam, 1st-generation college student, and so a lot of kind of the stereotypical messaging that you might see in mainstream media is that, Southeast Asian parents, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer, engineer, those high-paying jobs. And so my parents, as I was growing up, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a doctor. So I went to UA and declared my major, and I was going to be a statistician. And so it didn't, obviously not a doctor, statistician either. The Noyce program, what it taught me was that teaching was viable. that teaching, even though as the son of Vietnamese immigrants, is something that I could do, even though I never saw an Asian teacher in my K-12 education experience. So for me, Noyce taught me that teaching STEM is something that I could do, that it's sustainable, and that it's needed.
I can follow that. So similar experience. I am also an immigrant, and growing up, it was always you have to do what you have to do, and you just have to go to college, graduate, get good grades, get a good job. And so as a teacher, that's something that's sort of in my mind constantly. And if you ask any of my students, what's something Jai always says? And one of the things that I always say to my students are, you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. And they always say, well, what does that mean? And I say, it means however you want to interpret how it means. But I've learned that it's important through the program, I've learned that it's important to have flexibility. And it's important to have high standards and have high expectations, but also learning how to give second opportunities or third opportunities, because it creates growth for our students. And learning, and this is something I'm still learning, how to have a balance between having tough love for our students, but also ensuring that they have what they need to succeed in life. Something I'm still working on, but I think being flexible and learning as you go along is important.
I'm also a child of immigrants. I think there's a theme going on. And my parents come from very different places, from Peru and Egypt, so I kind of had like a little bit of everything in my experience, and I've lived and grown up in Virginia my entire life, and going to UVA was a huge deal for myself and my brother, and being able to live in that community and study there and see how diverse and unique everything is in that community, how special it is, to then be someone who's learning there, to then become a teacher there, is radically empowering for me to see how different people's lives are, and to study at the University of Virginia and then to work there in those public schools. I think one of the big things I got away from that was having a student mindset and then a practitioner mindset there, and then becoming a part of the community. And one of the best things I got out of that experience was the privilege to work in such a diverse community, and one that is so focused on social justice. And my county is one of the few counties that I know of that has a written anti-racism policy that was written by the students, and being able to be a part of that community and push those kids to hold accountable their community and have the support of the university behind them has been really empowering for them and also for me as a growing educator.
Wow. All right. I think the most important thing that I learned through my Noyce program was not teaching to a deficit. And it's something that I constantly remind myself of every day. And it's no shame to Chelsea Public Schools, but it's such a pervasive force that I feel all around me all the time, where other teachers might say to a student like, oh, they don't know fractions, so we're just not going to have fractions in our lesson. Or students are uncomfortable with rationals and irrational numbers, and small things like that, like small things that aren't in a student's math background. And then I think about my own experiences as a student that went to Chicago Public Schools and a lot of different schools growing up, and the gaps in my knowledge, and I think about the teachers that really pushed me and that helped me feel empowered as a math learner, and that's something that I want to create for my students all the time, and it's a really big goal I strive for. And so it feels like a friction all the time, but I'm glad that through my program and through other colleagues that I've met and that work with, that it's a good feeling to feel like you're empowering students, and that's something that I always try to keep in my mind, that if no one pushes them, if someone is not there to push them, no one will.
So I am not the child of an immigrant. In fact, I believe that my closest relative who would have immigrated was my great-great-grandmother. And I say that because actually I want to encourage you to continue sharing your stories through the generations in your families, because it does mean a lot to the later generations who have benefited from you. I do know that my great-great-grandmother left her family with her husband and traveled on a boat, and they ended up somewhere around the Hayes area. She had her baby, her first baby, on that boat on the way over. And the other thing that goes along with that is that the captain of that ship gave her a set of silverware as a gift. And then they got to wherever they were at, and then that silverware started corroding, and she thought it was ruined, so she threw it away. But because they were poor, they didn't understand that silver, you can just polish it back up. It was true silver. So anyway, I wanted to tell you to keep sharing your stories, because it does mean a lot. The most important thing that I learned in my Noyce program, going in, all of us were under the assumption that we would go to rural schools for the most part. And we all came from rural schools, so we understood that where we were going to wear a lot of hats. We were going to teach lots of different classes. We were probably going to coach and sponsor a lot of activities. We were probably going to be very involved in the community, so we kind of understood that. The most important thing, I think, was the stories that our master teacher told us. He said, when you go into your community, you need to figure out pretty fast what the culture is, what the culture in the school is, and what the culture in the community is. He said, the most important thing is Friday night football. You need to be there. He said, and then you really need to figure out quick, is the town going to talk about you because, oh, that new science teacher, she was at the bar after the game? Or are they going to say, that new science teacher, she wasn't at the bar after the game? So figuring out the community, figuring it out really fast. And we got a little bit of experience with that. Each of us in the Noyce program got to go and live with a teacher for a week over winter break. And we lived with them. We did their job with them. We got up when they got up. If they ran a bus route, we got on the bus route with them. If they coached basketball, we went to the basketball games with them. If they coached Scholars Bowl, we went to the Scholars Bowl. So we lived their experience, and we got to see how much they put into it. And that was a really eye-opening part of our Noyce program.
That's hard to follow, guys. I'm thinking about my answer, and I wasn't going to share my story all the way, but it does relate to my answer a lot, so I appreciate y'all sharing. And I'm in an urban school district, but I'm from a rural area, so I do appreciate you that are in those schools wearing 8 hats, because those people who did that for me, it meant a lot. Because I lost my parents at a young age. I lost my mom in 5th grade. And I lost my dad in 8th grade. Oh no, I'm getting emotional. I'm sorry. So I really do appreciate you for doing that. And the Noyce program, the reason why it's important to me, and like what I got out of it is, I'm sorry, I did not plan on getting emotional. Thank you. I seek out mentors everywhere I go. I see people, when I was becoming a dad, I saw my friend who had 5 kids. I was like, he knows. How much time should I take off? So going to college, I dropped out, and I went back, and when I got to UTA, Dr. Cavallo and everybody else really took me under their wing, and the scholarship meant a lot to me because I had nothing. And the biggest thing that I got from this scholarship was seeing people like you and me up here right now, and everybody else who's up here speaking, because I had to take every bit of that and put it into my career and my teaching. So also, it's really important, Ms. Okhee, what you're talking about with your research and your why and why we're here, and the keynote speaker yesterday and everybody who's coming up here. I need to hear that, because teaching is hard and you give every day, and it's very sacrificial, and it's hard to stay in the program, and a big thing that we focus on is retention. So to hear, why am I still doing this? I love the kids. I see myself in all of them. But I need to know, why is it important? What is the generational effect on this? So that is what I've gotten out of the Noyce program. I'm sorry.
I appreciate you acknowledging the contributions of the Noyce projects, programs that you're part of. So I would like to shout out to PIs and program leaders to get the best of your Noyce scholars to become Noyce fellows and master teaching fellows. So I would like to thank all of you who take the leadership to support and get the best of the next generation of STEM education. So thank you for that. Right, so to continue the conversation, I would like to ask you, beyond the Noyce program, what was the best advice that you received when you started your teaching in your own classroom? So you are out from the Noyce scholar into the teaching.
Yes, I'll answer that one first as well. And I'm going to frame my response by asking how many of us have answered the question, what do you teach? Or have been asked the question, what do you teach? And I challenge us to not ask or answer that question, because the question I think we should be asking and answering is, who do we teach? Right? We teach students, and that was the best piece of advice that I ever got. And that the content that we use is the vehicle for teaching students to be better people. To Eddie's point, and to everyone else on this panel, like, we all have our humanity in what we do, and so do our students. So when we're asking and answering the what do you teach, and the first answer is, oh, I teach math or I teach science, we lose sight of who our students are as individuals. And so for me, I always think about the who do I teach. I teach these 8th and 9th grade students from backgrounds that are, all over, high SES, low SES, bring a lot of culture into the classrooms. How do I leverage their assets? And so for me, just thinking about the best piece of advice that I've ever gotten was reminding myself that it's who I teach, not what I teach, that the what I teach is just how I can reach my students and meet them where they are.
Yeah, and I'll follow that too, and say that I recently had a conversation with a teacher that I currently work with who was my teacher in junior high. And I was kind of just frustrated with the trying to adhere to a curriculum where, we're here and we're here and we're here and we're here. And I was just so frustrated with that. And she said, I hear you. We don't teach a curriculum, we teach students. So I think that goes a lot along with what you are saying. And I think that the most important thing that I have done since becoming a teacher is to continue to attend workshops. And those workshops are places where I can meet other teachers and I can learn from them. And I had my mentor teacher at the first district that I was in. He did workshops. Like he went around a lot, and he was always encouraging me. He said, "You need to go, you need to go." And I'm like, "No, I'm so stressed. I'm just trying to stay with my head above water my first couple of years." But I listened to him, and now that's my favorite part of my summers is attending workshops and meeting people and learning how better to teach students. Different ways of teaching students.
Am I heard? Okay. I'm really glad that you brought up also culture in the classroom. I think that's really important. And it reminds me also of like the most important thing that I carry with me all the time into the classroom. And it's advice that I received from my advisor at BU and also from my supervisor practitioner, and it's to be my authentic self in the classroom, and not try to be like another teacher. And like what I mean by that, like not that other teachers don't have great lessons, but that I shouldn't follow it like a script. And I think about those moments in my first year where I had student playlists, I was playing corridos in the morning and like all these other things, and the students were like giving me their music recommendations and stuff, and those cultural connections were key to establishing the classroom environment I wanted, and also just feeling good about being myself in the classroom and bringing my own ethnic and racial identity there, and having that representation was really important for students. I felt like, I think about like those like moments before first period where I am talking to a student and they're telling me about a chisme, and just like that advice has been instrumental in my growth, and it's gonna be something I continue to carry with me, that you need to bring your whole person to the classroom, and that will be the most respected by students and build the community you want.
In a sense, we are all saying the same thing, that when I said traditionally I am the expert and I'm the authority and I'm telling you little people who do not know what I teach, to what you're saying that students have the agency and I'm serving them. So Betty, we are going to ask the question differently, not what you teach, but who do you work with, who are your students, so it flips. That's a great segue to my next question. Since Raphael, you said about the assets, and you said about that you work with the students. So your students bring assets, just like you bring assets to the Noyce program. I would like to ask you to give one experience or one lesson that you learned from your students about their asset that made you very humble.
Start with that one. So I think how you mentioned like something like sticking to the script. And so when I first started, it was sort of like, I think as a teacher, it's in your head, I got to do this, 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 and the third, I have to make sure I start here, and I got to make sure I end there. And I think throughout my experience as a teacher, I've learned to not take myself so seriously all the time. And to laugh with my kids and to have fun with my kids. And just like, I think there was one moment I just burst out laughing, and then we all started laughing, and it was just a moment of joy. And I think it's important to have those moments in classrooms once a day, maybe more. And it's also important to acknowledge your mistakes as teachers in the classroom. I think because we often be like, we have to get X, Y, and Z done, we don't leave room for errors, and we're humans, we make errors, and our students will make errors. And I think it's a two-way street for us to model to them what to do when you make errors, and just acknowledge it, have fun with it, and keep it moving, because you are a role model for your students, and you want to show them, yes, something might happen, but you just got to keep rolling with it.
I can add on to that. So I think it's very humbling to watch students teach themselves, because students are the best teachers. So if you let them and support them, they will take off. But if you stand in front and you say, listen to me and look at me, they will also do that. So they want to help, they want to teach, they want to learn. And if anybody tells you or says something different, like they're not gonna do that, don't listen. Try it. Maybe they're right, maybe that lesson isn't that great and you need to change it. But maybe it's different, and maybe your approach is gonna be the one that works. But students will help each other, they will translate, they will teach. And if you can help be there when they get to a point where they can't go any further, help them across that bridge. That's where you need to be. And it'll help the lessons go better. It'll help more learning happen, because instead of there being one teacher, you have a class of teachers and a class of learners, including yourself.
That's awesome. Anyone else who would like to add? All right. So we spoke about the assets that your students bring and the classroom of teachers and classroom of learners. Great. Now your students come from the community of various sizes, small and big, rural and urban and all that. So just like your students bring assets to your classroom to enrich your teaching as co-teachers, your community also brings assets that promote your teaching and student learning. So I would like to ask you to give one example or lesson that you learned from the community that makes you humble and become a better teacher. Katie.
I can start. So we have a wind farm. It has like 110 or 112, I think, is the number, wind towers. That's about 8 miles away from the town in which I teach. So I took a group of 10 students on a bus. I drove the bus out to this wind farm. And we went to their technology hub where they have all their computers and they can look at all of the systems, and then actually got to drive them out to a wind tower, and we got to go inside the base of it. Didn't get to climb it. That would take a long time apparently. And they climb it with a ladder, those guys. They each go up at least one a day. But I got to take kids out there and say, hey, this is something that you can do, and you can do it here. Because we have a lot of kids that really, they don't want to travel very far from home after high school. And I think that that's great. I want them to go out and learn something and then bring it back to our community, because it's a community in which I'm also raising my own children, and I know that it's a community that I will stay. My husband farms, so we can't pick the farm up and move it. We also have welcomed 4 children in our 6 years of a marriage. So I like to say that we were very efficient with that. And I also want to shout out my oldest. Today is his birthday. Benjamin is 5 today. So happy birthday. So I think that when you're thinking about training your teachers, you want to keep in mind that at least for me, I wanted to go into teaching because I knew I wanted to have a large family, and I wanted to build a good community and a good education for them. So if you know that you have students who are planning to go back to their communities, or at least close to their communities, you can really pull from those areas and build relationships with those people, because they want their community to succeed and their school to succeed more than you want their school to succeed, because they have that vested interest.
I totally agree with you about becoming a parent. Really reminds you that the community does care and they really want to help. So my wife is here, and we have 3 babies in the last 3 years. So we are not with them for the first time in 3 years, so we're having fun. Becoming a dad really made me think about, I was surprised when I would see the community I made a post and I said I want to do this math competition for STAR, and I want to get prizes and candy, and man, people in 30 minutes met my goal, and they really want to see the students want to learn and be successful, and especially at the end of the year when you have no energy left, how can we all make it to the end and actually, instead of being out of gas, get more gas in the tank and finish strong. It's hard. But the community really wants the school to be successful, and there's so many opportunities. So don't hesitate to reach out to your community. And also, the kids need to see that because, like me, they'll be inspired to go back into the community. You know, I went from UTA like 6 blocks to the junior high that I'm at. So, you know, that inspiration goes back in to the community that it's getting from.
I'd also like to add to that. So if anyone's been to lovely Charlottesville, it is a dynamic and changing community that's part rural and then part very urban. And it has, in the 10 years I've been living there, it has completely changed. And I think when we think about our community and their assets, we have to remember that they're dynamic and constantly changing. And the people who are there and the people who move to our communities. I have a lot of immigrant populations from all over the world. We have the IRC, the International Rescue Committee in Charlottesville, so we get people from all over the world, and what I've learned from them is that they want to be a part of our community, even if it is a rural American town that is always been the way it is. Things are changing, and the people who come into our communities, the children and the families that we get to steward as teachers, want to be involved. And my school is really focused on community, and we hold forums for our families after school. And what we hear from our Spanish-speaking community is that they want to be involved. They want teachers who speak Spanish. They want us to reach out to them. They want communication in their language, and they want to be involved in any way that they can. And part of our job as teachers is to show them how they can be involved and what we can learn from them and what they can bring to our community as well.
So you get the sense that we are seeing the themes that emerge, and one is the agency of the students and agency of the community by leveraging the assets of the students as co-teachers and co-learners, but also the community as co-developing the teaching profession. And then beyond that, Jai, you said something about joy of a teaching and love of a teaching, and then you said about the belonging to the community. Katie, you'll be there with your children. So there is that the agency, the assets, and joy, and love, and belongingness. So that's the way it expands into the community. It's not part of the script, but I would like to share my sense of a community. And that, in New York, people will say you have to be in New York at least a decade to be a New Yorker, 20 years, and born in Brooklyn with a Brooklyn accent, and I never thought I would be. So I was traveling quite a bit, and one day I was in a taxi, and I was coming home, and suddenly it felt like, wow, I'm home. And that was an epiphany of, in the city of 8.4 million people, and one person feeling, I am home, and this is my community. So we have a sense of a community in very different ways, but that was my community. Okay, so thank you. Now moving into a little bit of a troublemaker, but also learning from the lesson, and the question is, so describe a moment when you felt, uh-oh, what trouble had I gotten into? And saying, oh, that was a good experience. It was not just okay, but great. That helped you realize that what I do makes a difference. So think about a moment that, uh-oh, I got in trouble. That was great, and I'm making a difference.
Okay, I can open with this question. Oh, am I heard? Okay. So many, to be honest, first year of teaching. It was nuts. I think back, I can barely remember making it to now, but I'm here. But I do remember this one day, and I don't know, I guess you think like you're bringing the most positivity and enthusiasm in the classroom, and you're excited, and sometimes just kids say the most disrespectful things. And like, I had a student say to me as I'm at the board writing, and I turn around, and he's like, that's why I'm gonna slash your tires. I'm like, what? And I don't think I handled the situation appropriately at all. I got emotional, I got upset, and I reflect on it for later. How can I handle this better? But it was definitely a wake-up call that not every interaction is going to be sunshine and roses, and there's a lot of students that bring trauma and resistance and aggression towards adults because of their own personal life experiences and their own traumas and all these other things all these other factors, social factors that are pressed on them from all sides. And so it was tough, and I was not sure how I was going to get up the next day and go back to that classroom and still put on a smile for that student. And I think I sat in my car and cried a little bit that day too. But I did also have positive experience. I think there's one student that comes to mind right away who I mentioned to my AP when I was having a evaluation meeting, I think at some point in March. And I was talking to her about like, oh yeah, and Sophia was doing great on the QPA, whatever, or performance assessments, and yada yada, praising the student. And she looks at me and she says, Sophia. I'm like, yeah, this is one of my top 5 students, super sweet. And she's like, she has a really hard time working with any teacher. And so it made me feel good that I was able to build a relationship with that student that was very positive. And I'm also glad that I didn't know that that was the, what's the word, conception, that other teachers had of the student as being a student that is difficult to work with. Because I don't know how it would have given me some bias entering working with that student. So I'm glad that I didn't hear about that up until that point, and I'm also glad that I was able to make a very positive relationship with a student up until the end of the year when they gave me a very beautiful letter that is so sweet. Oh my God. So that's the positive.
I'm going to build on what Raphael said, and I'm going to reflect back on my first year teaching as well. So going through my teacher education program at UA, it was a lot of practices built around NCTM's principles to action, 5 practices. So I came into my classroom with this idealistic perception of, I'm going to come in, we're going to do high-level tasks, the kids are going to talk, I'm going to move them into groups, they're going to do all of the great mathematical things, they're going to become positive, self-identifying mathematicians. That did not happen. I came in, I moved the desks into groups, the kids are like, what the heck is this guy doing? So I came into an apartment that was very traditional. They were used to just sitting in rows, taking notes from the board, working through examples. So when I asked them to have conversations and to think, they struggled with that. And I struggled my first year to facilitate those conversations. And it was about mid-year where one of my assistant principals came in for kind of a mid-year conversation evaluation. And she asked me the question, after I shared some of my struggles, are your kids learning the way you're teaching? And that hit me really hard. And I was like, I thought they were learning, right? Like, to me, they're developing skills to have these conversations. It's still rudimentary. It's not where I want them to be yet, but I felt like they were learning and taking away the things that I wanted them to get out of the math classroom. But for her, she suggested, why don't you move them back into rows? Why don't you start giving them notes and lecturing as a way to kind of manage some of the things that I'm running into as far as discipline in my classroom. So I cried that day. I was like, man, did I choose the right profession? I came back, I finished out the year, and in the spring, I had a Sophia. Her name was Isabella, and she wrote me this note saying, and the very beginning of the note she opened with, I've never been a math person, but I learned all these things in your class. I loved your positive energy, and you made me feel like I could do math. And so, for all of us, I think, do it for the Sophias, do it for the Isabellas. Those are the kids that we're reaching with what we do.
Yeah. I have a Derek and a Chris. My hallway walkers, as we call them, you all will find them in the hallway. My first year at Urban, the math teacher came up to me and asked if I was interested in co-teaching with her a class where we were raising trouts in our classroom. And so there's this program called Trout in the Classroom. They give you eggs, baby trout eggs, and you raise them in your class, and then at the end of the year, you release the trouts into some stream, a freshwater stream upstate in New York City, or upstate New York. And so I was like, yeah, that sounds fun, let's do it. I did not know that it meant spending countless amount of hours after school making sure that our tank was cycled and our fish were still alive. Did not know that it meant coming in on the weekends to make sure that the fish were still alive. I did not know that it meant a trip to the ER because my co-teacher accidentally busted a sheet of glass on her hand. And I did not know that it would mean so much to our kids to have the fish in the classroom. Even our kids would always be like, are the fish alive? How are they doing? And like I said, at the end of the year, last year, we released them into a stream upstate. And then this year we did the program again. Last year we released 52 fish. This year we released only 2 out of 1,200. And so my kids would often be like, Jai, what happened to the fish? Why you killed the fish? And it was a learning experience. I didn't realize how attached they would get to the fish. And so that was I didn't know what I was getting myself into experience. But as a result of that experience, I have kids my hallway walkers that come to class, and I'm always like, well, he was in my class. He was in class today. And so it's nice to have that feeling, but I also was able to write a grant for $10,000 where I got to take my kids upstate. They spent one night upstate at the Ashokan Center. And I didn't think, oftentimes I teach high school, and I think we often forget that they're kids. And it was so nice to see them be kids upstate, 3 hours. Many of them were had never left the city before. And many of them didn't want to come back. They were like, I hope we do this again next year. And I said, well, I hope we get the funding. But it's a nice experience to see them remembering even 2 years after, are the fish alive? Oh, and as I also partnered with the Billy Noyce Project. And so now we not only have, we don't have them anymore, but we not only had fish, but we had oysters in our classroom, and we also have oysters in our East River. And our kids now know where our New York City water comes from, because when we started the program 2 years ago, they did not know where our water came from. And it's nice to also know that our waters are getting cleaner as a result of all the things that are happening, and we have dolphins and whales in New York City now. And it's just a testament, because a lot of them think, well, New York City water, it's so dirty. But they now know that it's not as dirty as it was 20 years ago. Yes.
Thank you. So we started with your appreciation of what you learned, the important thing from the Noyce program, and then what you learned from your students by leveraging the assets of your community, and you finally had a chance to say you learned from your mistakes and lessons learned of, oh, that was a good, valuable lesson, to know that you make a difference. So this is a chance to give back to the Noyce program. Now this is a long question, so I have to read because I wanted to do it right. So here is, a goal for all Noyce projects is to recruit, prepare, and retain STEM teachers and teacher leaders to persist in high-needs school districts. This is not easy, and in the current climate, it may be even more difficult. Based on your own experience as a Noyce participant and now as a teacher, what advice would you offer to the Noyce community to achieve this goal so that you can help the Noyce program? By the way, PIs and leaders, you're taking notes, right? Make sure.
I'll start that conversation. So, as you know my background, when I cried earlier, I think when you get out into the field, you're just looking for a job. And without experience, you just take one if you don't have a lot of options. And, that environment might not be the best student-focused environment. And if you don't have mentors and a network and people to talk to about it, it can be extremely isolating. And you might think this is what teaching's like, no matter where I go. I was blessed to be in a very positive, student-focused school, and I stayed there for 5 years. But I think it is extremely important to keep track of your scholars as they enter the field, and my program does a really good job at that, and I get checked on all the time, and I really appreciate it. And anytime there's an opportunity to help or reach out or connect, I'm like, where are we going? I get to meet people who love teaching and want to be better and want to grow, and so I think it's important to keep track of your scholars and try to help them and provide opportunities like this to network. And I just feel really refreshed being here and seeing you guys and everybody and hearing the talk. Like I needed this opportunity, so that's what I would say.
Last night, I was hearing some talk in one of the sessions about building relationships and that their Noyce group is a family. And we've never actually used that word within our group, but I do feel as though the cohort that I went through and then the ones that have come after and the few before that come back to our workshops every summer, the Noyce workshops that they have at Fort Hays every summer, we are very close. I look forward to coming back and checking in with, you're still at the same school? You moved schools. What have you done? What are you learning? What other workshops are you going to this summer? Having those relationships that we have built within the group is just the best part of what I got out of that program. Confident enough in feeling good about asking for a recommendation from one of the program instructors to call the district that I went into, and because I was asking for a higher salary than what I would have been on the schedule. And so felt comfortable enough to call and say, hey, would you call the superintendent and give him a little shout out to me, and so that might be more likely for me to get that increased salary, and I did. Knowing your worth as a science and math teacher, you are in demand, and you can do those things. It's been amazing. Another thing is that I get regular emails from my former Noyce instructors with opportunities, and some of them are opportunities that I think that they send to everybody. I know that they send to everybody, but some of them are opportunities that they have sent. They might send to everybody, but they shout me out specifically in another email and say, hey, Katie, I think you would be really good at this. So because of that, I've had several opportunities, things that I've been able to be a part of that came from the Noyce program.
Okay. All right. I always got to make sure that I could be heard. Well, first, I want to open by thanking Okhee for your research on multilingual learners in STEM, because that's actually what I think my point, like when I saw that question, this is my first thought, is thinking about how to teach multilingual learners and emerging bilinguals STEM. And I think about my Noyce experience in the classroom, and at BU, Massachusetts mandates one SEI course. And it was mixed, it was with other teachers from other different departments, mostly English and history. And it was over the summer, it was 6 weeks. And I don't think that was enough preparation to go in the classroom and work with students that don't speak English at all. And I recently came across a book that I started reading called Teaching Mathematics to English Language Learners, and I'm sharing it with some of my other colleagues in my Noyce cohort and stuff. And then I think to myself, like, well, why didn't we have a course centered around English language learners in STEM? So that is the one thing that I think that the Noyce community could strive for more, is because this is a country of immigrants and constant inflow of immigrants from all over the world and different countries, and they need to access STEM too. So that's the one thing that I think the Noyce community could improve on.
Yeah, I agree, and I also feel very privileged to have gotten a lot of instruction on how to teach STEM to multi-language students. And that has been such a good experience to have in my program. And I think the thing that I've really benefited from, and I think everyone needs, is to really have someone in their corner, whether that is your PI or a grad student or a teacher on the field already. Having those connections and that constant check-in is the only way to survive teaching, because it is so isolating. And if we don't have people in our corner supporting us, having our back, and making sure that when we are pushing up against these traditional ways of teaching and trying to show the new generation of science and the new experiences that we want our young people to have, that we have people behind us to support us. So I think the most important thing you can do is to support your teachers, be in their corner, get them connected, and support them with the changing dynamic of education.
Yeah, I concur. I was gonna say, I think I'm gonna repeat, I sense a theme happening. I think when I think of my Noyce program, I think of family. When I was doing the program at the American Museum of Natural History, we spent so many hours together in a room with no windows. It was fun. And I miss those times. But I think as a result of spending so much time together, we developed a family. And that family is very important for me as, I guess I'm still a new teacher. Because as teachers, we are away from our family countless amounts of hours. And it's important to feel like you have a family in your career, because I think people, if you're not a teacher, if you're not in the teaching field, it's hard for people outside of that world to understand what it's like to be inside of that world. And so it's important to have a family inside of your career. And I feel like at AMNH, I have a teaching family. You can have that at your job, but you don't want to go venting to your coworkers and then having them tell that coworker, oh, this person was venting about me. And so I remember when in my first and second year, we would have induction nights once a month, and it was just a good place to vent about what's going on in your school. And it's important to do that because it's important because it keeps you in your space. It keeps you in your career because it also reminds you of why you have to keep going. And then it's always a resource you can turn to. Just the other night, I had a old classmate call, and it's like, hey, have you ever done advisory? Do you know what restorative circles are? And it's like, all right, let's talk. And we talked for 2 hours about it. And I think it's important to have those resources and those connections, especially when you're like, I don't know what the hell to do, because that happens a lot.
So my answer is going to go in a different direction from the rest of the panel. I think they've talked a lot about retention efforts and families and networks, and I completely agree. I think for me, speaking to the Noyce community, it's going to be about the recruitment efforts. And to yesterday's videos with specifically thinking about Dr. Andre Green and what he shared, and then Gloria Ladson-Billings, like if we don't act now, we are going to miss out on a whole generation. So I think the recruitment has to happen before these kids get into college. I think a lot of Noyce programs are trying to pull from other majors saying, hey, you're good at computer science, you're good at science, you're good at math, why don't you consider teaching? For us, I think our best opportunities to recruit are in the classrooms right now. I mean, the students have interest in these fields and they're pursuing other career opportunities, but we're not being advocates for our own profession when we're saying, oh yeah, you can be that engineer, which is great, but you could also be this great science teacher. You could be this great math teacher. I was in the Air and Space Museum yesterday. I saw a bunch of little kids running around, and they were like, dude, check that out. Looking at the, I think it was the moon exhibit, right? Or, hey, I wonder how that worked, right? They're curious at a young age, and I think we do ourselves as a profession a disservice when we don't foster that curiosity and say, hey, you can continue to do this work as a teacher and help inspire other kids and be that representation in the classroom that we so often lack. In my area, I can think of one other Asian teacher, and we have a significant Asian population. Right? So when we are not intentionally recruiting kids at an early age and saying, hey, we can bring you into this field, into this space, so that you can be a teacher and be a role model for others, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice. So I would encourage PIs to think about ways in which you can grow your programs beyond just your university or college space and reach out into their school communities and say, hey, how can we support your students in finding career paths into education?
I would like to add, based on your comments and your sharing your experience, it's a recruitment, preparation, induction, and retention, but leadership. All of them are leaders, and all of you are leaders. So I would like to emphasize, by doing it, saying it, you demonstrate leadership for all of us. So I would like to add that component. All right. Thank you so much, and we have some time for questions from the Noyce community. And so we welcome any questions, including my own talk too, if you have any questions. So we are going to open up for any Q&A. I see a microphone over there, and do we have any microphone over there? There's one. There. So I would like to ask any of you to ask questions to all of us.
I don't want to go up to the microphone. I'll just ask my question with my own voice. But so with the rise of a new form of cheating with OpenAI such as ChatGPT, how would you recommend adding that being used by students who circumvent writing assignments? Because these things can write anything from a simple poem to a full-on lab report.
Can I take that one? So as a math teacher, and I appreciate the question. So we, as a math teaching community, have had calculators as one of those kind of big things where, oh, kids are going to have access to calculators now. They don't need to think about those computational aspects. We have apps like Photomath or Symbolab that you can scan questions, and it'll give you step-by-step procedural ways in which we think about things. And so for me, thinking about ChatGPT, large language models, and these other forms of artificial intelligence, it's a tool that which we can use to leverage what our kids are doing and forces us to change the ways in which we're teaching. Right? I think if we're concerned about cheating, then we're thinking about what we're assessing in ways that are not productive to student learning. Right? So we have to think about these tools as ways in which we can frame what we're doing differently and just think about what it is that we're asking our kids to produce. Because if a machine can produce it, then where is the human element of what it is that we're doing for our students? So that's how I would think about that. I wouldn't necessarily avoid using ChatGPT. I would figure out ways in which you can integrate and build meaningful ways to use large language models to support what we're doing in the classroom. That's my take on it.
Anyone else? Katie?
Yeah, and to go along with that, show them how it can be wrong, because it's wrong a lot. So really show them that. Having relationships with your students and saying, I feel like a big part of my job is I'm a cheerleader for my kids. I say, you can do this, you can think, you can be this big, important person who does good in your community. But you can't do that if a computer is thinking for you. So I am here to help you develop into a person who can think for yourself. And that's hard for them because it's there and it's easy, and we, as humans, we want the easiest, quickest way to get what we need to get. So bringing them out of that hole of the easiest possible thing and saying, hey, this is hard, but you can do it, and it will be better because you can do it. I feel like that's more our job as teachers.
Thank you. Lisa, question over there.
It's not. I don't know how to turn it on.
We can hear you.
Oh, okay, thank you. Raphael, I'm with you. So I have a question. I know there was the mention of like the trout fishing, but I really wanted to know, because y'all talked about your communities, I wondered if in your classroom or your schools, if you are partnering with any community leaders, nonprofits to kind of support that agency, that advocacy that was spoken of.
I could speak on this one. Something that I'm very passionate about is also like tapping into my community's resources, at least the community of Chelsea, Mass, because it has a stigma of being a community that is dangerous. And when I told some people like, oh, I'm going to Chelsea, like that I know that I haven't met in Mass, they're like, oh, wait, you're going to Chelsea? Why? I reached out to the Fab Foundation. I don't know if any of you guys know what the Fab Foundation is. It's, well, they run makerspaces all around the world and stuff. Because I used to intern at one when I was in undergrad in Chicago. Because MIT is right there in Massachusetts. It's literally less than 2 miles away. And I think that accessing those resources is really important, especially for under-resourced communities. They could do more, right? Boston's a city that has so many colleges and universities that I personally think don't do enough for the schools that are there that have such high needs populations and students. So as soon as I did that, and I reached out and they connected me to all these other people, and I had these Zoom meetings, and like, okay, we could get 3D printers and laser cutters and all these other things. Like, it's a whole thing happening now. This man came to see me from the community who owns a local restaurant, talking about like, oh yeah, I used to work at a makerspace too. And it's like bringing these ideas and reaching out to nonprofits generates excitement for making learning happen in extracurriculars and extended learning is the word I was looking for, and gets people in the community excited. So I'm not sure if I answered your question completely, but that's my response there.
Anyone else that you would respond?
I think I can add to that a little bit. So in addition, like obviously there is the community involvement with bringing STEM into our public schools or into our school communities, but I think there's also a good point in bringing in mentors into our schools. So we get mentors from the University of Virginia. We have the Latino sorority and fraternities come in and mentor our newcomer students. We have a MOCA and WOCA, which is men and women of honor and ambition, which is more about the support and is less academic, but focused on building our young people to have positive mentors in their development as young people. And I think that you can find in any community is mentoring young people with the people who already exist.
Thank you. You had a question, yes.
Yeah, I'll just use my voice. It's around new induction, new support, new induction. Knowing what you know now, what support or induction experiences you would like to have that you think would increase your retention? We're all here, but further increase your retention will help you make that transition from a scholar to a teacher of record.
Okhee, can you please repeat the question so that the audience can hear it? I'm right here. Can you please repeat the question?
Travis, would you be the Oprah Winfrey to bring the... I will.
That's what I'm going to do. So if anybody can't get to a mic for any reason, if you raise your hand, I'll find you. Sorry if I step on any toes.
Here, the front desk. Can you? Oh, we have a new Oprah Winfrey.
So again, the topic was around induction and new teacher support, and the question basically,
knowing what you know now, what recommendations would you make to PIs and co-PIs about the type of support and induction experiences that would further enhance your experiences?
I mean, I do think checking in is super important, especially that first year of teaching. I remember my first year was the COVID year, and it was insane. And it was like halfway through, I thought I knew what was going on, and then I had to rewrite everything to be online. And I think coming in and supporting your new teachers, especially that first year and those first couple, 5, 10 years, making sure that they know that you have their back, that you're giving them feedback on what's working, what's not working, how is it different from what you learned in the classroom, and then how is it applying it in real life. And having, I think, mentorships, even between teachers, even though it's not the same school, I think having a mentor from that university continuing after you finish the program would have been super helpful in being able to navigate education.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that also. I don't know, it's all meshing together, but I think I had inductions for two years? 2 years, yes. Thank you. And I miss it. I think it was an important time to think about how you're teaching. Not that you don't, but just like to reflect on your teaching. And I think there's always something always happening, and so having a space primarily where the primary focus is reflecting on your thinking and sharing what you're doing and sharing like what's not working and learning from others is important. And 2 years I think was really good, and I don't think a lot of teachers get that, but maybe 5 years or more would be nice. It doesn't have to be once a month, it could be like once in a while, but I think just having a once in a while check-in is beneficial. And what do they say? 7 years is when you feel like you're in it, but maybe you never feel like you're in it. I don't know. All right, I'm done.
I will say too that having that, I took the scholarship for 2 years, so I had to intern teach for 4 years. Having that little bump to get me over it, like year 2 and 3 was the hardest, and year 3 was my COVID year. But I think actually 4 was even harder than that, the year that we came back. We were able to come fully back. But yeah, it was so hard. So having people around, it's that community, it's that family, it's those relationships, I really think it's the most important. And when you're trying for recruitment too, you can say, hey, we have this group of people who are with you. They're going to help you make more money. They're going to help you be a great teacher. They're going to support you if you're down. So really pushing that, I think that will help.
Can I add on to that? I'm sorry.
So I appreciate Raphael mentioning bringing your authentic self to the classroom. So I'm curious to know if there are other strategies that have been helpful to you in making connection and establishing trust with your students, and then if there were things that your program or your Noyce community did to help you develop those affective skills that you're bringing into the classroom.
I can start on this one. And it goes along, I was going to answer your question, and it's along the same thing. It's about making connections. Learning how to teach takes time. It takes a lot of mistakes. And you learn the nuance of trying to balance that along the way. It takes years for me at least. But I think it's really important to build relationships in a very positive learning environment and classroom culture. And I think when you first start, that is why a lot of people don't make it through, is because they weren't able to make those connections, and the classroom environment can become toxic very easily if you're not on top of it. So I think when you are starting with your teachers or in their first 2 years, to really try to find concrete things, like the question that she asked I'm about to answer, concrete things to do, to build relationships, make connections, and have a positive classroom culture. which are my strengths every time I get observed, is my classroom culture and my relationship with students. I was blessed to be at a school that really focused on that when I first started teaching. And so I was able to, I knew I wanted that, but they gave me things to do. And you know, one of those things is like greeting at the door, right? Getting that temperature check when your students walk in every day. And when somebody walks in, you're not looking for high or low, you're just looking for something different. If they normally come in really happy and you have to say like, hey, take a deep breath before you come in, we gotta come into a learning environment, but they come in and they're kind of heads down, you know, you notice a change. Or if they usually come in and they're kind of, you know, heads down every single time, and they come in, they're like really hyper, you're like, what happened at lunch? You have a new girlfriend or something? Let's not bring that into the classroom. So it is an extremely, like important part of my day, and I make sure I greet every single person at the door every single time. It's also an extremely important place to manage classroom behaviors. Maybe the last class you didn't get to talk to somebody because it's chaos at the end of the day. Turn this in, where are you going? Don't touch that. And so when you're greeting, you see somebody and you remember last class period, hey, come step over here real quick. We need to have a quick talk. And then like another thing that I do is at the beginning of class, we do like shout outs or like good things. And you know, it's a way to do it short, sweet, 2 minutes. Who's got something positive? And you get to hear about your student's life and what they're interested in. And you make a quick turnaround and you say something and you like affirm that you heard it, and you just kind of bounce around the room. And you're doing two things. You are making connections and learning what you have in common with your students. And the second thing is they're learning from each other what they have in common. And somebody who they didn't know, who's from a different elementary, different junior high, they both like Dragon Ball Z. They're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna have to talk to him later. And so you build that culture and that community in your classroom, but you have to make sure you focus and make sure it's always positive. And anytime you have some toxic or negative traits, you want to squash those.
I need to do a little bit of management. We have time. I would like to respect the 3 participants who would like to ask questions. So Betty, my suggestion is that I would like to respect the questions and responses, even they may go over just a couple more minutes. I would like to ask 3 of you just to say questions. As you ask questions, I want one person to respond to one of the 3 questions so that all the questions are on the table and addressed by one person. So let's do questions and then think about how you would respond. One person, okay?
Okay. Well, my question is when you're struggling at any time teaching, who is like your go-to support system? Like, who is your go-to person at your school when you have a question or you think you might need help or like just really want to know more about your students? Who's your go-to?
So one question is who is your go-to? Stay there. Another question is?
Oh, good morning. I'm curious about what insight you have into our next generation STEM learners. So from your perspective, your students who are younger than you, what insights do you have about our new generation of STEM learners? How are they different, similar? What insights do you have about new STEM learners?
Okay. And there's one more question.
So my question is, a lot of the things that we teach and a lot of the skills that we build as individual teachers in our respective subjects are kind of really intertwined with a lot of the same skills that are built in other subjects. So are there connections that I guess any of you have made with the other teachers in your schools, or are there things that you want to kind of see built between different teachers and different subjects within your own schools?
Thank you. So we have 3 questions, and you are going to be very strategic and artful of responding to one of the questions of one person. First question.
Can I do the first question?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So at my school, we are different from a lot of other New York City public schools, and so as a result, we have a 2-year mentorship program. And so that is the person that I usually go to, my mentor. But I understand that sometimes, even if you have a mentor, I think New York City does a 1-year mandatory mentor program. And so even if you have a mentor, you might not have a good, positive relationship with them. And so they might not be the person that you want to go to when you need someone to talk to. And so I think finding that someone, they don't always necessarily have to be in your subject area, but they could just be, it's important, it's just somebody that you know you can trust that won't kind of spread your business to everybody. So that's the person I say you can go to when you need to talk about anything at school.
The second question, anyone who would respond about next generation of learners?
I think I can answer that. I feel inspired every day by our young people and how, like I'm not even that old, and I'm like, oh my gosh, the world is so different now. And they are just so ready to be involved and to make their own learning what they want it to be. So what I see now in this conference, the kind of model that we're moving away from traditional to more student advocacy and then moving towards student justice, and that is our future, is students wanting to learn about what is important to them and being able to apply it into things that are important to them, and being able to use technology like AI is a great tool and able to enhance their ability to do things that we never would have even thought of was possible. Like I just learned you can put Smart Trip on your phone, and I grew up in this area and I always use a plastic card, and I'm like, oh my gosh, who invented this? And it's just like we need to let people come up with their own creative ways of navigating the world and not be afraid of letting them do their TikTok dances or whatever, because all of that is the creativity and the nuance of a new generation that I don't even understand, and I'm only 28, but like they got it. They know what's going on, so let's trust them and push our students forward to teach us something about our futures.
Now, who would take the final question of the session about STEM broadly?
I can. Okay, so I was a science teacher for 5 years and I taught only science, and then I have switched to only math for this next coming year. I feel like as a math teacher who has that science background, when kids come in to me and say, when will I ever use this in my life? I'm like, well, maybe not after high school, but you're gonna do it right across the hall over here next year when you take chemistry. So I have that kind of in my back pocket now. At the first school that I taught, my mentor teacher, he always said that I wish that we had algebra and physical science together. I wish that it was one class. And that would take a complete frame shift of the entire education system. But I don't think that it's a bad idea because science and math are related. So maybe, I'm just like, mine's running up here while you guys are asking these questions and while you're talking. But maybe some funding could go into, because the thing that's really hard is that we might have teachers that are willing to do that, but that would take a lot of planning. So if there was funding in the summer to get teachers together and say, okay, in math, you're going to do this at the same time in science, and I'm going to do this. And in English, you're going to work on technical writing while our students are working on labs. You have to get people together to make it work within your school.
Thank you. As we close the session, I would like to thank all the Noyce scholars, Noyce teaching fellows, and Noyce master teaching fellows, and all the PIs and leadership teams. But I also it's wonderful to see Travis York and Betty Kellinger from AAAS and AAAS staff. But Catherine Berger from National Science Foundation for the funding, and our NSF program officers and funding. It's a real collaboration at the leadership level to make it happen at multiple levels of the education system and multiple levels of the leaders from the beginning, I don't mean scholars to the end. But most importantly, I would like to thank the fun and insightful and futuristic and thoughtful panelists for that.